The first crack of dawn painted the horizon in ribbons of amber, and rose as Pauline Barrows stared out the window of her modest cabin on the outskirts of Downeyville, California. The year was 1868, and at 32 years of age, she had long since resigned herself to a life without children. The doctor in Sacramento had been clear 7 years ago her womb would never quicken, he'd said, with a clinical detachment that still haunted her dreams. "You're up early?" came a gruff voice from the doorway. Pauline turned to see Martha, her housekeeper and friend of 5 years, already dressed for the day's work. "Couldn't sleep?" Pauline replied, absently brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face. The dreams came again. Martha clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Still dreaming of little ones running through these rooms?" "Yes," Pauline admitted, turning back to the window. Beyond the glass, Downeyville was stirring to life. Nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills, the once booming gold town had settled into a quieter existence after the initial rush had faded. Much like Pauline herself. "Well," Martha said, stoking the fire in the kitchen stove, "I heard that Cattle Drive is coming through today. Might be good for business." Pauline nodded, thinking of her dress shop on Main Street. After her husband Thomas had died in a mining accident 4 years prior, she'd taken over his dry goods store and transformed it into a dress shop. It had been her salvation, giving her purpose when motherhood had been denied her. "I should get ready then," Pauline said, pushing away from the windowsill. "Those cowboys always need mending done, and they pay well." Martha's wrinkled face broke into a smile. "And some of them ain't bad to look at neither." Pauline gave a dry laugh. "I'm well past such notions, Martha." 32 is hardly ancient, Mrs. Barrows," Martha chided gently. "And that shop of yours would make a fine family business someday." "For whose family?" Pauline asked, the familiar ache rising in her chest. "The good Lord saw fit to close that door for me." As the morning progressed, Pauline found herself busy with preparations. Her shop, Barrows Fine Apparel, sat proudly on the main thoroughfare of Downeyville. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully as she entered, its sound at odds with the heaviness in her heart. By mid-morning, the sounds of the cattle drive reached town, the low, persistent bawling of the cattle, the shouts of cowboys, the clatter of hooves against the hard-packed dirt of the main street. Pauline watched from her shop window as dust rose in great clouds, obscuring the advancing herd. The door to her shop burst open around noon, and a tall, broad-shouldered man strode in, removing his hat in one fluid motion. Trail dust clung to his clothes and hair, and his face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes, a startling clear blue, were alert and intelligent. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone. "Name's Franklin O'Malley. I'm with the drive passing through. Got some shirts that could use your expertise, if you're taking on work." Pauline found herself momentarily flustered by his direct gaze. "Of course, Mr. O'Malley. I'd be happy to help." She gestured to her counter. "You can leave them here with me." Franklin nodded, but made no move to leave. Instead, he glanced around the shop with appreciation. "Fine place you have here, Mrs. Barrows," she supplied. "Pauline Barrows." "Mrs. Barrows?" he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. "This is quality work," he added, examining a displayed dress. "Thank you," she said, pride momentarily displacing her earlier melancholy. "I learned from my mother, who was a seamstress in Boston before coming west." "Boston," he said with a smile. "That's quite a journey. What brought you to Downeyville?" Pauline hesitated, unsure why she felt compelled to share her story with this stranger. "My late husband. He came for gold, like so many others." Franklin's face sobered. "My condolences, madam." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when the door opened again, admitting another cowboy younger, more boisterous. "Hey, Frank. Foreman's looking for you. Says we're moving on at first light tomorrow." Franklin nodded at the young man. "Tell him I'll be along shortly, Billy." Turning back to Pauline, he said, "How soon might I get those shirts back, Mrs. Barrows?" "If you bring them by this afternoon, I can have them ready by morning." "Much obliged," he said with a smile that transformed his weather-beaten face. He replaced his hat and headed for the door, then paused. "We'll be driving a herd to Sacramento and then heading back this way in about 3 weeks. I'll look forward to seeing your fine establishment again." As the door closed behind him, Pauline found herself staring at the empty space where he had stood, wondering why her heart was beating so rapidly. The shirts arrived an hour later, delivered by the young cowboy named Billy. There were 3 of them, well worn but of good quality, each with tears that spoke of hard work and rough country. Pauline worked on them into the evening, her fingers moving deftly over the fabric, her mind drifting repeatedly to the blue-eyed cowboy who had stood in her shop. Morning came, and with it Franklin O'Malley, right as she was opening the shop. He looked freshly shaven, his hair still damp from washing. "Mrs. Barrows," he greeted her, hat in hand. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all, Mr. O'Malley. Your shirts are ready." She retrieved them from behind the counter, wrapped neatly in brown paper. As he paid her, his fingers brushed hers, and she felt a jolt of something she hadn't experienced in years. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. "Mrs. Barrows," he finally said, clearing his throat, "I wonder if I might be bold enough to call on you when we pass back through town?" Pauline felt her cheeks flush. "Mr. O'Malley, just for coffee," he added hastily, "or perhaps dinner. I've been on the trail for months, and it would be a pleasure to converse with someone who doesn't smell of cattle and dust." Despite herself, Pauline laughed. "I suppose that would be acceptable." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. 3 weeks, then. I'll be counting the days." After he left, Pauline stood motionless behind her counter, trying to make sense of what had just transpired. It had been so long since she'd felt this way, this mixture of anticipation and fear, this quickening of the pulse at the thought of seeing someone again. "It's just coffee," she told herself sternly. "Nothing more." But as the days passed, she found herself thinking of Franklin O'Malley more often than she cared to admit. She told herself it was natural a widow, lonely in a small town, meeting a handsome stranger who showed interest. Nothing would come of it, of course. She had long since accepted her lot in life, a childless widow with a dress shop in a mining town. And yet, when Martha asked if she was feeling well, her cheeks being unusually flushed these days, Pauline couldn't quite meet her friend's knowing gaze. 2 weeks and 6 days after Franklin O'Malley left Downeyville, Pauline found herself checking her appearance in the mirror more often than usual. She had made herself a new dress, emerald green calico, that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, telling herself it was for the upcoming town social, not for the blue-eyed cowboy who might or might not remember his promise to call on her. The cattle drive arrived right on schedule, the familiar sounds of lowing cattle and shouting cowboys filling the air. Pauline tried to focus on her work, telling herself she wouldn't watch the window for him. She failed miserably. When the bell above her door finally rang, and Franklin O'Malley stepped into her shop, her heart leapt in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "Mrs. Barrows," he said, removing his hat. His hair was damp again, his face freshly shaven. "I hope you're still amenable to that dinner?" She was. They arranged to meet at the Downeyville Hotel's dining room that evening at 7. As he left, Pauline caught Martha watching her from the back room, a knowing smile on her weathered face. "Not a word," Pauline warned, but she couldn't keep her own smile at bay. Franklin was waiting when she arrived at the hotel dining room, standing as soon as he saw her. He wore clean clothes, not fancy, but neat and well cared for. His eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of her new dress. "Mrs. Barrows," he said, pulling out her chair. "You look lovely." "Thank you," she replied, settling into her seat. "And please call me Pauline." "Pauline," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "A beautiful name." The dinner was pleasant, the conversation flowing easily between them. Franklin told her about his life on the range, how he'd been working cattle since he was 16, saving to buy his own ranch someday. Pauline shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her journey west with her parents, meeting her late husband. "And no children?" Franklin asked gently when she mentioned Thomas's passing. Pauline's smile faltered. "No," she said quietly. "That was not in God's plan for me." Franklin seemed to sense her pain, deftly steering the conversation to lighter topics. By the time he walked her home in the moonlight, Pauline felt lighter than she had in years. At her door, he took her hand. "I have to head out with the herd tomorrow," he said, his voice low in the quiet night. "But I'd like to write to you if that's all right." Pauline hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that, Franklin." His smile in the moonlight made her breath catch. "Good night, Pauline," he said, squeezing her hand once before releasing it. "Until we meet again." The first letter arrived 2 weeks later, carried by a fellow drover heading through Downeyville. Pauline's hands trembled as she opened it, surprised by her own eagerness. Franklin's handwriting was unexpectedly elegant, his thoughts articulate and thoughtful. He wrote of the drive, of the beauty of the Sierra Nevada foothills, of a particularly stubborn steer named Hector who kept trying to lead the herd astray. He asked about her shop, her days, whether the autumn rains had started in Downeyville yet. Pauline read the letter 3 times before sitting down to compose her reply. Their correspondence continued through the autumn months. Franklin was driving cattle between ranches and markets, moving around Northern California, but his letters found their way to her regularly. Pauline found herself looking forward to them with an intensity that both delighted and frightened her. In November, a letter arrived with unexpected news. Franklin had taken a job as foreman at a ranch just 20 miles outside of Downeyville. He would be arriving within the week, and hoped to call on her. The day he was due to arrive, Pauline changed her dress twice, fussed with her hair until Martha finally threw up her hands in exasperation. "Land's sake, girl. The man's already sweet on you. No need to drive yourself to distraction." "I'm not," Pauline began, then stopped at Martha's knowing look. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes," Martha replied dryly. Franklin arrived just after noon, looking more settled than she'd seen him before. His clothes were newer, his boots recently polished, and there was a confidence in his stride that hadn't been there before. "The Silver Creek Ranch," he told her over coffee in her parlor. "It's a good outfit. Owner's getting on in years, looking for someone to take over more of the day-to-day operations." "That sounds promising," Pauline said, trying not to focus on what this meant, that he would be nearby, that they could see each other regularly. "It is," he agreed, his eyes never leaving her face. "It means I can court you properly, Pauline, if you're willing." Pauline's heart hammered in her chest. "Franklin, she hesitated, uncertain how to voice her concerns. "What is it?" he asked gently. "I'm Barren," she said bluntly, the words painful even after all these years. "The doctors confirmed it. If you're looking to start a family—" "I'm looking to court you," Franklin interrupted. "The rest we'll figure out as we go." Pauline studied his face, searching for any sign of reservation, but found only warmth and determination. "Then yes," she said finally, "I am willing." The winter of 1868 into 1869 was one of the happiest times of Pauline's life. Franklin rode into town every Sunday, and sometimes on Wednesdays too, when ranch work permitted. They attended church together, took meals at the hotel, walked along the Yuba River when the weather allowed. By Christmas, the entire town knew that Franklin O'Malley was courting the widow Barrows, and most approved. Franklin was well respected, hardworking, and it did everyone's heart good to see Pauline smiling again. On New Year's Eve, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in her parlor, Franklin asked Pauline to marry him. "I know it hasn't been that long," he said, holding her hands in his larger ones. "But I love you, Pauline. I want to build a life with you." Tears welled in Pauline's eyes. "Franklin, I love you too, but I need to be absolutely certain you understand what marrying me means. I can't give you children." Franklin reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. "Pauline, listen to me. I'm not marrying you for the children you might bear. I'm marrying you because I love you, your strength, your kindness, your spirit. If God blesses us with children, in whatever way, then that's wonderful. If not, then I'll still count myself the luckiest man alive to have you as my wife." Pauline searched his face, finding only sincerity in his clear blue eyes. Slowly, she nodded. "Then yes, Franklin O'Malley, I will marry you." They were married on a bright April morning in 1869, with the whole town seemingly in attendance. Pauline wore a dress of pale blue silk that she'd made herself, with Martha's help. Franklin looked handsome in a new suit, his face solemn but his eyes shining as they spoke their vows. After the ceremony, they moved into a small house on the Silver Creek Ranch, where Franklin continued his work as foreman. Pauline kept her shop in town, riding in 3 days a week to tend to it. Their life together was good, full of hard work, yes, but also laughter, companionship, and a deep, abiding love that grew with each passing day. If sometimes Pauline felt a pang when she saw a mother with a child, or if Franklin occasionally glanced with wistfulness at the ranch hand's new baby, they didn't dwell on it. They had each other, and for now that was enough. 6 months after their wedding, Pauline began feeling unwell. At first, she dismissed it as a passing illness, perhaps a touch of the influenza that had been going around Downeyville. But when the nausea persisted, particularly in the mornings, a wild, impossible hope began to form. "I think you should see Doc Wilson," Franklin suggested one morning, after holding her hair back as she retched into a basin. Pauline shook her head. "It's nothing, just a stomach ailment." But Franklin was insistent, and finally, Pauline agreed to ride into town to see the doctor. Doc Wilson was new to Downeyville, having replaced old Doc Simmons just the year before. He was younger, fresher from medical school, with new ideas and approaches. After examining Pauline and asking a series of increasingly personal questions, he sat back in his chair with a bemused expression. "Mrs. O'Malley," he said slowly, "I believe you're with child." Pauline stared at him, certain she had misheard. "That's impossible," she said flatly. "I was told years ago that I couldn't have children." "By whom?" Dr. Wilson asked. "A doctor in Sacramento." He was quite emphatic. Dr. Wilson sighed. "Medicine is not an exact science, Mrs. O'Malley. Doctors can be wrong. And based on your symptoms and the timing, I'm fairly confident in my diagnosis." Pauline left the doctor's office in a daze, her mind reeling. She couldn't believe it, wouldn't let herself believe it, for fear of the crushing disappointment that would follow when it proved false. But as the days passed, and her courses remained absent, and the morning sickness continued, Pauline began to wonder if the impossible was happening after all. She waited another month before telling Franklin, not wanting to raise his hopes only to dash them. By then, her dresses were beginning to feel snug around the waist, and she could no longer deny the changes in her body. One evening in December, as they sat by the fire after supper, Pauline took a deep breath and reached for her husband's hand. "Franklin," she said, her voice trembling slightly, I have something to tell you. He looked at her with concern. What is it, love? Are you still feeling ill? No, well, yes. But Pauline took another breath, steadying herself. Franklin, Dr. Wilson thinks I'm with child. Franklin froze, his eyes widening. What? I know it seems impossible, Pauline rushed on. And I've been afraid to hope, but it's been 2 months now, and all the signs are there. A baby! Franklin breathed, his voice filled with wonder. We're having a baby? Pauline nodded, tears springing to her eyes. It appears so. Franklin let out a whoop of joy that startled her, then gathered her into his arms, mindful of her still flat stomach. Oh, Pauline, he murmured against her hair. This is wonderful news. But what if the doctor is wrong? Pauline couldn't help asking, voicing her deepest fear. What if I lose it? Franklin pulled back to look into her eyes, his own suspiciously bright. Then we'll weather that storm together, he said firmly. But for now, let's believe in this miracle. As the winter deepened, so did Pauline's pregnancy. Her belly swelled, her breasts grew tender, and the morning sickness eventually gave way to a ravenous appetite. Franklin watched over her like a mother hen, insisting she cut back her hours at the shop, making sure she ate well and rested enough. By spring, there was no hiding her condition. Pauline's dresses had all been let out, and the town buzzed with the news that the woman who thought she couldn't have children was expecting one after all. Martha was over the moon, already knitting baby clothes and planning to move into the ranch house temporarily after the birth to help. The women of Downeyville, many of whom had been Pauline's customers for years, showered her with gifts and advice, some welcome, some less so. In May, as wildflowers carpeted the meadows around Silver Creek Ranch, Pauline felt her baby move for the first time, a fluttering sensation like butterfly wings inside her womb. She was sitting on the porch when it happened, mending one of Franklin's shirts. The sensation was so unexpected that she gasped aloud. What is it? Franklin asked, alarmed. He had been chopping wood nearby and rushed to her side. Is it time? Should I get the doctor? Pauline laughed, reaching for his hand to place it on her rounded belly. No, not yet. Feel. They waited, Franklin's large hand gentle on her stomach. And then it came again, the tiny flutter of life. Franklin's face transformed with wonder. Is that? Yes? Pauline whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. That's our baby. That night, as they lay in bed, Franklin's arm protectively around her, his hand resting on her growing belly, he whispered, I told you we'd figure it out as we went along. Pauline smiled in the darkness. You did. I should have had more faith. Faith is exactly what got us here, Franklin replied, kissing her temple. Faith and love. As Pauline's due date approached, the heat of summer settled over the Sierra Nevada foothills. July brought scorching days and warm nights, making Pauline uncomfortable in her advanced state. She had given up working at the shop entirely, leaving it in the capable hands of a young woman named Clara, whom she had trained over the past few months. Franklin fretted over her constantly, especially when the summer thunderstorms rolled in, bringing with them the risk of wildfires. One such storm hit in early August, lightning striking the hills above Silver Creek Ranch. The ranch hands and nearby farmers battled the resulting blaze through the night, finally containing it by dawn. Franklin returned home exhausted, his face streaked with soot, only to find Pauline pacing the floor, her hands pressed to her lower back. What is it? He asked, immediately alert despite his fatigue. Is it the baby? I think so, Pauline said, her voice tight with pain. The pains started about an hour ago. Franklin's exhaustion vanished. I'll get the doctor, he said, already turning for the door. No, Pauline grabbed his arm. Send one of the hands. You need to stay with me. Franklin hesitated only briefly before nodding. He rushed outside, shouting for one of the ranch hands to ride for Doc Wilson, then returned to Pauline's side. The labor was long and difficult. By the time Doc Wilson arrived, Pauline was drenched in sweat, her face contorted with pain as contractions racked her body. Franklin held her hand through it all, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement, his own fear hidden behind a mask of calm support. As the sun began to set on that hot August day, Pauline's cries reached a crescendo. With one final, monumental push, their child entered the world red-faced, squalling, and perfect. "A boy," Doc Wilson announced, placing the wriggling infant on Pauline's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Pauline gazed down at her son through a haze of exhaustion and joy, her fingers gently tracing his tiny features, the button nose, the wispy dark hair, the mouth already working in protest at this cold, bright world. Franklin leaned over them, his face wet with unashamed tears. "He's beautiful," he whispered, touching the baby's hand with one finger, "just like his mother." They named him Samuel Thomas O'Malley, Samuel for Franklin's father, Thomas for Pauline's late husband, whose memory she still honored. Samuel had Franklin's blue eyes and Pauline's determined chin, a combination that delighted them both. One evening, as she nursed Samuel in the rocking chair by the fire, Franklin watching them with a look of contentment, Pauline said softly, "I still can't believe he's real sometimes." Franklin knelt beside the chair, his hand gently cupping his son's head. "She believed she was barren for years," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But our baby proves otherwise now." Pauline met his gaze, her heart so full it felt as though it might burst. "Yes," she whispered, leaning forward to kiss him. "He certainly does." The first year of Samuel's life passed in a blur of firsts: first smile, first laugh, first tooth, first hesitant steps. Pauline reopened her shop with Samuel in tow, setting up a small play area in the back room where he could nap or play while she worked. The women of Downeyville doted on him, bringing him treats and toys, exclaiming over how he grew. Franklin proved to be a devoted father, patiently walking the floor with Samuel when he was colicky, teaching him to clap his hands, building him a tiny rocking horse for his first Christmas. As Samuel's first birthday approached, Pauline began experiencing familiar symptoms: morning nausea, tender breasts, fatigue. This time she recognized them immediately. When she told Franklin she was expecting again, his joy was as boundless as it had been the first time. "God is good," he said simply, gathering her in his arms. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace Martha O'Malley, arrived in March of 1871, pink and perfect with a cap of red gold hair that was pure Franklin. Samuel, not quite two, regarded his sister with solemn curiosity, patting her head gently when encouraged to touch the baby. Life on Silver Creek Ranch settled into a pattern of domestic bliss punctuated by the usual trials: illnesses, droughts, the everyday challenges of raising children and running a ranch. The old owner eventually sold the property to Franklin, fulfilling his dream of having his own land. Pauline continued to run her shop, though now she worked only 3 days a week, taking the children with her when they were old enough. The business thrived, expanding to include not only dressmaking but also millinery and fine embroidery. In 1873, to their surprise and delight, Pauline discovered she was expecting their third child. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two. She was older now, and running after 2 small children while carrying a third took its toll. But in December, just as the first snows were dusting the Sierra Nevada, William Franklin O'Malley made his appearance, a robust baby with a lusty cry that, according to Martha, could be heard clear to Sacramento. As Pauline lay in bed that night, her new son sleeping in a cradle beside her, her husband dozing in a chair nearby, and her older children being watched over by Martha in their room down the hall, she marveled at the fullness of her life. From a woman who had resigned herself to childlessness, she had become the mother of 3 beautiful children, the wife of a man she adored, a successful business owner, and a respected member of the community. "Penny for your thoughts?" Franklin murmured, opening his eyes to find her watching him. "I was just thinking about how fortunate I am," Pauline replied softly. "How blessed." Franklin rose from his chair to sit on the edge of the bed, taking her hand in his. "We both are," he said, his gaze moving to their sleeping son. "But I knew from the moment I met you that we were meant to build this life together." "Even when I told you I couldn't have children?" Pauline asked, a question that had lingered in her mind despite the evidence to the contrary sleeping peacefully beside her. "Especially then," Franklin said firmly. "Because I loved you for you, Pauline. The children are a blessing, the most wonderful blessing, but they're not why I married you." Tears welled in Pauline's eyes. "I love you, Franklin O'Malley." He leaned down to kiss her gently. "And I love you, Pauline O'Malley, more with each passing day." Their family continued to grow, not only in the conventional sense of 4th child. Another daughter named Elizabeth arrived in 1875, but also in the way they expanded their circle to include others in need of a home. In 1877, a fierce winter storm brought an unexpected visitor to Silver Creek Ranch. Franklin found a young boy, no more than 12, huddled in their barn, half frozen and terrified. His name was James, he told them, and he had run away from an abusive situation at a neighboring ranch. With no family to claim him, and no desire to return him to his previous circumstances, Franklin and Pauline took him in. James was wary at first, expecting to be sent away once the storm passed. But days turned into weeks, and as spring arrived, he was still there, gradually becoming a part of the family. Samuel, now 8, idolized the older boy, following him around like a shadow. Grace, at 6, appointed herself his teacher, solemnly showing him how to set the table properly. Even little William and Elizabeth accepted him without question, climbing onto his lap for stories as if he had always been their brother. By summer, it was official James had a new last name and a permanent home at Silver Creek Ranch. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of growing children. Samuel showed a natural aptitude for ranching, working alongside his father from an early age. Grace inherited her mother's skill with a needle and began helping in the shop as soon as she was old enough. William, much to everyone's surprise, displayed a talent for numbers and was often found with his nose in a book of mathematics. Elizabeth, the youngest, was a free spirit who loved music and spent hours singing to the cattle, claiming it made them give better milk. James, their unexpected addition, grew into a fine young man with a gift for training horses. By the time he was 18, his gentle methods were renowned throughout the region, and ranchers brought their most difficult animals to him. In 1880, when Samuel was 11, an influenza epidemic swept through Downieville. The O'Malleys were not spared. All of the children fell ill, along with Pauline. Franklin moved between sickbeds tirelessly, his face drawn with worry as he administered the remedies Doc Wilson had prescribed. For a terrifying week, it seemed they might lose Grace, whose fever soared dangerously high. Franklin and Pauline took turns sitting with her, applying cool cloths to her burning forehead, praying as they had never prayed before. When the fever finally broke, and Grace opened her eyes, lucid for the first time in days, Pauline wept with relief. Franklin, who had been strong for so long, finally allowed himself to break down, sobbing as he held his daughter's hand. "I thought we might lose you," he whispered, stroking Grace's hair. "Couldn't leave," Grace murmured weakly. "Still have to teach James how to dance for the harvest social." Franklin laughed through his tears, and Pauline knew then that they had weathered another storm. As the children grew older, The house sometimes seemed too small to contain their energy and dreams. Samuel, at 16, began talking of attending agricultural college back east. Grace, 14 and already a skilled seamstress, had designs on opening her own shop in Sacramento someday. William, at 12, was corresponding with a mathematics professor at a university in San Francisco who had been impressed by his solutions to complex problems. 10-year-old Elizabeth was composing her own music on the piano Franklin had bought her for her 8th birthday. And James, now 21, had saved enough money from his horse training business to buy a small property adjacent to Silver Creek Ranch, where he planned to start a breeding operation for quarter horses. "They're growing up so fast," Pauline said to Franklin one evening. As they sat on their porch watching the sunset, the children were inside Samuel and James discussing cattle prices, Grace teaching Elizabeth a new stitch, William absorbed in a book of logarithms. "That they are," Franklin agreed, his hand finding hers as it had countless times over the years. At 52, his hair was more silver than brown now, and lines fanned from the corners of his eyes, but to Pauline, he was as handsome as the day he'd walked into her shop with shirts to mend. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped in Downeyville that day?" Pauline asked. Franklin considered this for a moment. "No," he said finally, "because I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be, Pauline." Pauline smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I believe that too." In the spring of 1885, Samuel left for college back east, the first of their children to venture so far from home. Pauline worried. Of course mothers always do, but she was also proud of the young man her firstborn had become. Tall and straight like his father, with the same clear blue eyes and steady manner, Samuel had grown into a person of integrity and purpose. "He'll be fine," Franklin assured her, as they stood on the platform at the railway station in Sacramento, waving until the train carrying their son disappeared from sight. "And he'll be back." "I know," Pauline said, brushing away a tear. "It's just hard to let go." Franklin put his arm around her shoulders. "The first one is the hardest, I expect. But we've done our job, Pauline. We've raised them to fly." The next few years brought more changes. Grace, at 19, did indeed open her own shop in Sacramento, specializing in wedding gowns and fine ladies' wear. William, at 17, received a scholarship to study mathematics at a prestigious university. Elizabeth, 15 and blossoming into a beauty with her mother's chestnut hair and her father's blue eyes, was gaining local fame for her musical compositions. James married a local girl, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and brought her home to the property he had developed into a successful horse breeding operation. Their first child, a boy they named Franklin after the man who had given James a home and a future, was born in the winter of 1888. "Grandparents?" Pauline marveled, as she held baby Franklin in her arms. "We're grandparents now." Franklin, his hair now more white than silver, beamed with pride. "And don't we wear it well?" Pauline laughed, passing the baby to him. At 52, she was still an attractive woman, her figure fuller but still trim, her face lined but glowing with contentment. "Speak for yourself, old man. I'm still as young as I ever was." "That you are," Franklin agreed, his eyes soft with love as he looked at her over their grandson's head. "That you are." Samuel returned from college with a degree in agricultural science and a fiancée, a pretty, intelligent young woman named Rebecca who fit into the family as if she had always been a part of it. They were married in the spring of 1890, in a ceremony performed in the garden at Silver Creek Ranch. Grace made the bride's gown. Elizabeth played the wedding march she had composed especially for the occasion, and William, home from university for the event, stood as his brother's best man. As Pauline watched her firstborn son pledge his life to the woman he loved, she found herself transported back to that day in Doc Wilson's office, when he had told her the impossible news that she was carrying a child. The joy and disbelief she had felt then echoed now as she watched the man that child had become starting his own family. After the ceremony, as the celebration continued around them, Franklin found her sitting alone on a bench beneath the old oak tree. "Happy tears?" he asked, handing her his handkerchief. "The happiest," she confirmed, dabbing at her eyes. "I was just thinking about how different our lives might have been if Dr. Wilson had been wrong all those years ago." Franklin sat beside her, taking her hand in his. But he wasn't wrong. And even if he had been, even if Samuel and the others had never been born, I would still count myself the luckiest man alive to have spent these years with you. Pauline leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence as she had for more than 20 years. "I know," she said softly, "and I feel the same way. The children, the grandchildren, they're wonderful blessings. But you, Franklin O'Malley, you're the miracle I never expected and always needed." Franklin's arm tightened around her. "As you are for me, my love. As you always will be." The years continued to pass, bringing more changes, more joys, and yes, some sorrows too. In 1892, Martha, who had been like a mother to Pauline for so many years, passed away peacefully in her sleep. The entire family mourned her, gathering to lay her to rest in the Downeyville Cemetery on a crisp autumn day. "She was the first person who believed I could build a new life after Thomas died," Pauline said to Franklin, as they stood by the freshly turned earth. "She pushed me to open the shop, to keep going when all I wanted to do was give up." "Then I owe her a great debt," Franklin replied, his voice rough with emotion, "because she helped shape the woman I fell in love with." The next year brought happier events. Samuel and Rebecca welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Pauline, after her grandmother. James and his wife had their second child, another son. And Elizabeth, now 23 and as independent as ever, returned from a musical tour of Europe engaged to a violinist she had met in Vienna. "A European son-in-law," Franklin mused, when Elizabeth brought Anton home to meet them. "Never thought I'd see the day." But Anton, with his quiet manner and obvious devotion to Elizabeth, soon won over even Franklin, who had been prepared to be skeptical of the foreign young man who wanted to take his youngest daughter so far away. "He loves her," Franklin admitted to Pauline, after spending an afternoon showing Anton around the ranch. "And he respects her talent. I can't ask for more than that." William, meanwhile, had become a professor of mathematics at a university in California, publishing papers that, according to his colleagues, were revolutionizing the field. He remained unmarried, dedicated to his work, but visited the ranch often, delighting his nieces and nephews with mathematical puzzles and tricks. Grace, too, was flourishing. Her bridal shop in Sacramento had expanded to include locations in San Francisco and Los Angeles, making her a successful businesswoman in her own right. She had married a kind, steady man who managed the financial side of her business, and they had 3 children who split their time between the city and visits to their grandparents' ranch. By 1900, Silver Creek Ranch had grown considerably from its modest beginnings. With Samuel back to help run it, and James's successful horse breeding operation next door, the O'Malley name had become synonymous with quality livestock and fair dealing throughout California. Franklin, now in his 70s but still active, had stepped back from the daily operations, leaving those to Samuel and the capable foreman they had hired. Pauline, too, had passed the management of her original shop in Downeyville to a younger woman, though she still enjoyed sewing special pieces for her grandchildren. "I never thought we'd have all this," Pauline said to Franklin one evening, as they sat on their porch swing watching the sunset. The ranch spread out before them, cattle grazing in the distance, the buildings solid and well-maintained, smoke rising from the chimneys of the homes their children had built nearby. Franklin nodded, his hand warm around hers. "It's more than I dreamed of," he admitted. When I rode into Downeyville that day, I was just looking to get some shirts mended. And you found a wife instead, Pauline teased. I found everything, Franklin corrected, squeezing her hand. My whole world. In the spring of 1902, they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary with a party that brought all their children and grandchildren back to Silver Creek Ranch. It was a joyous occasion, the house and garden filled with laughter, music, and the running feet of the youngest generation. Elizabeth and Anton had traveled from Vienna with their twins, now 5 years old and bilingual, chattering in a mix of English and German that delighted their cousins. William had taken a sabbatical from his university position to spend the entire summer at the ranch. Grace and her family had closed their shops for a week to attend. Samuel and Rebecca, who lived in a house just down the road, had organized much of the celebration, and James and his wife had contributed a magnificent anniversary cake. As evening fell, lanterns were lit in the garden, and Elizabeth sat at the piano Franklin had bought her all those years ago, playing a piece she had composed for the occasion. Anton accompanied her on his violin, the music rising sweet and clear into the night air. Pauline, watching her family gathered around, felt her heart so full it might burst. Franklin, standing beside her, seemed to sense her emotion. Quite a legacy we've built, he said softly, for her ears alone. Yes, Pauline agreed, leaning into him. And to think, I once believed I would leave nothing behind but a dress shop. Franklin chuckled, the sound as warm and familiar as his hand in hers. You never did lack for imagination, my love. But even you couldn't have imagined all this. No, Pauline agreed, looking around at their children, their children's children, the life they had created together. This is beyond anything I could have dreamed. Later that night, after the party had wound down and their guests had returned to their respective homes or the rooms prepared for them in the main house, Pauline and Franklin stood once more on their porch, looking up at the star-filled sky. 33 years, Franklin mused. Doesn't seem possible. And yet here we are, Pauline replied. Here we are, Franklin echoed, pulling her close. And do you know what I remember most clearly from all those years? What's that? Pauline asked. That moment in the doctor's office when you told me we were going to have Samuel. The look on your face, disbelief, joy, fear, all mixed together. Franklin's voice grew husky with emotion. And then, holding him for the first time, this tiny human we'd created together against all odds. Pauline nodded, her own eyes filling with tears at the memory. I was so afraid to believe it was real, after being told for so long that it was impossible. But it was real, Franklin said, turning to face her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. All of it, every day since then has been real and precious, Pauline. And I thank God for each one. Pauline reached up to touch his face, tracing the familiar lines that time had etched there. So do I, Franklin. So do I. In the years that followed, they watched their family continue to grow and change. Grandchildren graduated from schools, got married, had children of their own. Great-grandchildren toddled across the floors of Silver Creek Ranch, played in the same garden where their parents and grandparents had played before them. Franklin's health began to decline in 1908, when he was 78. A bout of pneumonia left him weaker, his breathing sometimes labored. But his mind remained sharp, his love for Pauline and their family unchanged. I'm not going anywhere just yet, he assured Pauline when she fussed over him. Still got too much living to do. And he did live fully, joyfully, gratefully for 4 more years. He saw his youngest great-grandchild born, taught several of the older ones to ride, and celebrated his and Pauline's 43rd wedding anniversary with a family picnic by the creek that had given their ranch its name. When the end came, in the autumn of 1912, it was peaceful. Franklin slipped away in his sleep, Pauline's hand in his, just as it had been for over 4 decades. The family gathered again at Silver Creek Ranch, this time in mourning rather than celebration. But even in grief, there was a sense of completion, of a life well lived and well loved. "He was ready," Samuel told his mother gently, as they stood together after the funeral. "He told me last week that he'd done everything he wanted to do, loved everyone he wanted to love, and seen his dreams come true tenfold." Pauline nodded, her eyes dry now after days of tears. "I know," she said, "and I'm grateful for every moment we had." In the quiet days that followed, Pauline found comfort in the rhythms of ranch life continuing around her, in the visits from her children and grandchildren, in the memories that filled every corner of the home she and Franklin had built together. One evening, as she sat on the porch swing where they had spent so many twilights, Samuel joined her, a small wooden box in his hands. "Found this in Pa's desk," he said, sitting beside her. "It has your name on it." Pauline took the box, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "He was always full of surprises," she murmured, opening it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper, and beneath it, the 3 shirts Franklin had brought to her shop all those years ago, mended, worn, but carefully preserved. With trembling fingers, Pauline unfolded the note. "My dearest Pauline," it read in Franklin's strong hand. "If you're reading this, I've gone ahead of you, though I fought against it with every breath. I wanted to leave you something to remember our beginning by. These shirts brought me to you, and your skilled hands mending them was the first of countless ways you made my life whole. I have loved you through every season, every joy, every sorrow. Wait for me beyond the veil, my love, and we'll begin again in eternity. Forever yours, Franklin." Tears flowed freely down Pauline's face as she clutched the letter to her heart. Samuel, his own eyes wet, put an arm around her shoulders. "He loved you something fierce, Ma," he said softly. "And I him," Pauline replied. "Every day, even now." Pauline lived another 7 years, surrounded by her family, watching the next generation grow, sharing stories of their grandfather with wide-eyed great-grandchildren who knew Franklin only through these tales. She remained active in her family's life, offering advice when asked, wisdom when needed, love always. She saw William finally marry at the age of 49 a fellow mathematician who shared his passion for numbers and theory. She celebrated when Elizabeth's twins, now in their 20s, performed a concert at a prestigious venue in San Francisco, playing compositions their mother had written. She beamed with pride when Grace's oldest daughter took over the management of all 3 bridal shops, continuing the legacy Pauline had begun with a single dress shop in Downeyville. When her time came, in the spring of 1919, Pauline was ready. At 83, she had lived to see the end of a terrible world war, the birth of her first great-great-grandchild, and the 50th anniversary of the day Samuel was born, the child who had proven that miracles were possible. On her last day, she asked to be wheeled out onto the porch of Silver Creek Ranch, to feel the sunshine on her face and look out over the land she and Franklin had loved. Samuel sat with her, now a man of nearly 50 with gray in his hair and his father's eyes. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Pauline asked him, her voice thin but clear. "What's that, Ma?" Samuel replied, taking her frail hand in his. "That we loved well," she said simply. "Your father and I, we loved each other well. We loved all of you well, and you've gone on to do the same. That's the real legacy, Samuel. Not the ranch or the shops or even the children themselves. It's the love that flows through it all." Samuel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Pauline smiled, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "He's waiting for me," she said softly. "I can almost see him." That night, Pauline Barrows O'Malley joined her beloved Franklin, slipping away as peacefully as he had, surrounded by the family they had created together against all odds. At her funeral, attended by 4 generations of O'Malleys and half the town of Downeyville, Samuel stood to speak of his mother. Many of you knew her as Mrs. O'Malley, the seamstress who could turn a bolt of cloth into a thing of beauty. Others knew her as grandmother or great-grandmother, always ready with a story or a cookie or both. But I knew her first as Mother, the woman who, for years, believed she was barren, until I came along to prove otherwise. Samuel paused, his voice thick with emotion. I remember asking her once, when I was old enough to understand what a miracle my birth had been, if she ever regretted not having children sooner with her first husband. She smiled that smile of hers and said, "Samuel, everything happens in its proper time. You came when you were meant to come, to the father you were meant to have, in the place you were meant to be born. Never doubt that you were part of a greater plan." He looked out over the assembled mourners, his father's clear blue eyes scanning the faces of his siblings, his children, his grandchildren, and looking at all of us gathered here today, the family that grew from a love that began with 3 torn shirts and a needle and thread. I believe she was right. In the years that followed, the story of Franklin and Pauline O'Malley became something of a legend in Downeyville and beyond. The cowboy and the seamstress who found each other against the odds, who created a family when all hope seemed lost, who built a legacy of love that continued long after they were gone. And in the family Bible, passed down through generations, there remained a faded note in Franklin's handwriting, tucked between the pages where Samuel's birth had been recorded. She believed she was barren for years. I said, "Our baby proves otherwise now." And in that moment, I witnessed a miracle, not just the miracle of new life, but the miracle of hope reborn in the eyes of the woman I loved.